Welcome to Vigilant News for August 26, 2024. Justin Deschamps here, founder of Vigilant News. Ryan is not with us today. He actually left yesterday, so I'm going to be getting into a little bit of a life update to show you guys what's been going on behind the scenes here at the Vigilant News workhouse. We also got some news for you today. Let me pull up those headlines. We're looking at serious civil unrest regardless who wins. This is Martin Armstrong saying this, somebody that we've mentioned before on the show many times, the world's best economic forecaster. We'll get into some of what he had to say. Macron is widely mocked for saying that Telegram CEO's arrest was not publicly motivated. Find that highly skeptical. And then California colludes with big tech to wield control over local newsrooms and incorporate AI. That's pretty scary. I mean, frankly, I think that stuff's been happening for a while anyway, but the fact that they're talking about it publicly means they're in a different phase of the operation. So we definitely got some challenges ahead. So welcome to Vigilant News, everybody. It's good to be back. It's been, gosh, I think a couple weeks now. There's been a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes over here at Vigilant News, so it's good to see y'all. How's it going, PJ? I see you just posted in the chat. Good to see you, buddy. So we've got some interesting things going on here. I'll probably start with a life update. I also wanted to mention I have a new series I've decided to launch here. I've had to kind of readjust my content strategy a few times because I've got a lot of life stuff happening in the background. For those of you who don't know, me and my wife Madison discovered we were pregnant recently. I think she's 10 weeks pregnant at this point. So it's pretty much all but certain that we're definitely going to be having a baby, barring any unforeseen complications, of course. So we just had our first OBGYN visit last week. We're going to try to go as natural as humanly possible. I personally did not want to do and we both didn't want to do an ultrasound. I didn't realize how bad ultrasounds are, but apparently they're not so great. But we kind of had to do one to conform to the medical authoritarianism. But we have some pretty good methods of combating some of the nasty stuff that ultrasound apparently does to our children. So that's a long story short. We are having a baby for sure. Not that it would be surprised. We thought we were going to have twins for a while because she just had this instinct, but turns out there's only one baby in there, which in a way is a blessing because we're certainly not as financially abundant as I would have liked to begin this part of my life adventure, but here we are. So really grateful and praying that everything goes well throughout the pregnancy and we get transitioned because I am also moving, and that's part of the reason Ryan isn't here right now. How's it going there? By the way, we got Magri TJ Tag 42. We got Mist in the Mountains. How's it going? Yeah, I appreciate the support, guys. There's been a lot happening, so I'm going to finish giving this. So I just mentioned the very personal update about me and my wife having a baby. We're moving because of that. So our lease that we've been here in Georgia for almost 3 years now. It's a beautiful spot. I really love Georgia, but we decided we're going to move. And part of the reason we're going to move is because, community is so important. I think, as I've written about many times in Substacks and talked about many times on the show, like the globalists have utterly destroyed our communities. There was a time not so long ago, as early as like the 60s and 70s and even 80s, where when your family was kind of around, at least more around than normal. Like, for example, when I was growing up, I had, probably a dozen aunts and uncles peppered throughout a 100-mile radius of me, which wasn't as most ideal as it would have been back in like the 19th century, but it was way more ideal than it is today, which is now you take that, where are my aunts and uncles and my extended family? And they're just scattered all over the country. So it's pretty much impossible to get any type of logistical support for a young family, such as what me and my wife are planning to do here. But if we flash back even further, back into post-World War II era, there was staying in your town and having the family around was a lot more common, but it was starting to be, and it was already well on the way to being eroded. Flashback to the late 18th century or 19th century, so like 1880s, 1890s, there was already a fair amount of familial isolation happening because the globalist infiltration of our communities was already well underway. But they were actually building houses. So where I grew up in the Boston area, in Reading, Massachusetts, particularly. And I had a bunch of family in Lawrence. Lawrence was a mills town. It was right next to Lowell, which was also a mills town. And so when you think mills town, think, yes, it's industrial and it's part of the industrialization of the world, and there's all sorts of great things that come with that. And that's part of what I wrote about in my article for Agenda 47. But all this stuff came at a price. This was a Trojan horse, guys. The Trojan horse was this. Yes, we're going to give you access to employment so you can have steady income. You can have a lot of the splendors of an ever technologically advancing civilization. Mind you, this is back in the 1800s where, most people, or at least some portion of people, were living rurally. If you were moving out west, it was a really hard life. And so having the basics was not necessarily easy. Basics like clean food, shelter, water, access to basic industrial goods like, blacksmithing goods like textiles and spoons and pots and pans and stuff like that. But all of this was beginning to be modernized and industrialized. And so that meant that you didn't really need, somebody who knew how to weave cloth like you did back in during the Revolutionary period. You didn't need a blacksmith locally in town. You didn't need a leather worker locally in town, because you could have those products be made in large factories. And that's this whole idea of large factories coming about was, I'm fairly certain, this is something I need to verify, but I'm pretty sure that aspect of it began when the steam engine really started to take hold or at least was invented officially, and then began to modernize and industrialize the British Empire in the late 1700s, so like 1780, 1790, something like that. At the time, they were already massive, cities that were highly industrialized. You've got a very low income population. They need shelter, they need food. They're living in dense city populations. So it was like you either worked for the globalists at the time, which there were definitely globalists back then, or you starved. And if you were a pauper, meaning you didn't have enough money to support yourself, you know what they did? They shipped you off to the New World. And that's, the most of the slave population you hear about in the New World were not black people. The vast majority of them were indentured servants, usually Irish. But, so the point I'm getting at here is that the colonialists, the people who came to the United States to make the New World what it was, at least in the Northern American area, were people who, at least in some portion of them, wanted to actually recreate this kind of like autonomous, decentralized living situation where you had usually a church at the center, then you had various industries like, farming, of course. You had a bunch of different farms. Most people grew their own vegetables. You had extended families and families, like often the average number of kids, I think, was something like 6 to 10. So lots of kids because you needed people to work the farm, and you had farm animals, you had cows, you had dairy, you had all these things. And what that meant is that instead of needing a giant industrial state so that you can go work for the man and then use your money that you get paid from the man to go pay other industrialized mega entities to get your pasteurized milk from, none of that was the case. What you had cities and towns, like the town I grew up in, Reading, Massachusetts. It was founded in like 1644. And basically all the way up until the Revolutionary War, it was a collective of people who, centered around the church, helped each other build each other's houses, helped their sons and daughters find work in the local area, and everything could be fairly self-contained within this town. And that meant that that family was there to help with other family. And so that's part of the reason that we're moving actually to the Asheville area of North Carolina because we've got some family out there, and that's really the best option we have. If we don't do that, then there is no family we can access, despite our best efforts. Not to say that people wouldn't want to help, but that's the modern world. Most people are just in their lives. trying to work jobs, pay bills, stay on top of the things, keep up with the Joneses, keep up with your social medias, the whole deal. It's like there's a whole new demand on life where gathering together in community to support each other through the various life challenges is like, it isn't even really like a thought anymore in people's minds. So that's part of the reason we're moving. So behind the scenes in the Vigilant News HQ, we've got tons of activity. We got to be out of this place by October 1st, I believe, or it's like the September 30th. So the end of this upcoming month in September. So that's a big thing that we're doing. It's a lot of work that we've got to manage. We've been accumulating various pieces of furniture and stuff like that because our dream is to have a community. And when I say our, I mean like me, Ryan, my wife Madison, a good friend of ours, American hypnotist, other people. Basically every time I talk to somebody who wants to listen to me talk for a few minutes about community, they're like, yeah, that makes way more sense. Because anybody who's tried to raise a child, even if you've got, the nuclear family, you've got mom and pop's out working 40 hours a week and mom's at home all day long, that's a lot of work. As a matter of fact, the incidence of childhood issues and postpartum depression, as well as other forms of depression and mental illness, skyrocketed when the nuclear family became a thing around the 1920s and 30s, and certainly by the 1950s. And that's when you have this emergence of all these different pharmaceutical and medical things. I think the more psychiatric pharmaceuticals really may be launched in the late 70s, early 80s. But by that time, you already had the problem, and then the reaction and the solution was, a few decades later. So thank you, Allison N100, for the congratulations, as well as Jennifer Lynn. Congratulations, Jennifer Lynn, for moving closer to family. It's so much better. So much better. Even though things aren't, it's not like it's going to be paradise necessarily. There's all sorts of challenges that come with living with family, especially when our, historical traditions about how to actually live in community have been purged. But I think it's far and away a better thing. It certainly requires a lot more humility, a lot of the ability to communicate properly, negotiation, things like this, skills that I've been trying to develop for years and certainly been studying at a more academic capacity for a very long time. It was like one of the first things I discovered back in 2010 when I woke up and found cures for cancer. I was like, oh, wow, our society's been gutted from the kind of key principles that make any society function at all, which is trust, adherence to law, good virtues, morality, being willing to dedicate and commit to your family unit, to your community, knowing how to actually talk about problems, so without getting on too much of a tangent, we've been a part of several organizations here. I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to put anybody on blast, but one of the organizations that my wife has been a part of it's been beautiful. It's like one of the things that I'm going to miss so much about leaving this area. And yet at the same time, there's so much entrenched, I would say non-malevolent corruption, because it's non-malevolent in the sense that it's more like nescient or incompetent corruption. So there's corruption where it's like there's definitely a ringleader, there's definitely somebody who's consciously aware of what they're doing, and they're trying to manipulate people to get something out of them. That definitely happens for sure. But then there's corruption where it's like, well, they just don't know any better. They're just living out the cultural indoctrination that they've received all throughout their lives. And so they don't know necessarily that when somebody has a problem as a member level of an organization, that the leadership of that organization really has a duty as fiduciaries, meaning as a trust relationship, because every organization that exists, there's a trust relationship. If you're a member if you work for a business, your boss is actually your trustee. Now, in modern business, that almost never happens, and most business owners are, unbeknownst to them kind of like parasitic in the sense they're just trying to harvest as much energy up from their employees as possible. That being said, there's a lot of amazing, really good, ethical business owners that really care out there. So I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus necessarily, but what I'm really trying to say is that because there's a lack of knowledge about how to actually run a business, run a church, run a family, run a community center, run a nonprofit in a really, truly honorable and acknowledging our unalienable rights way, corruption is natural. And that's the whole point. That's the reason the cabal did it. The cabal spent 500 years stripping this stuff out of our communities and our culture and replacing it. And it really, like, the run up of all of this really started to take off, I would argue, somewhere in the 1800s. And then by mass media, it was just like, it was like a factory grade, industrialized version of it. By the time you got mass media, that's what part of what mass media is all about, is TV, radio shows, literature. It's all designed to strip away the tools that God gave us, which is our free will, our ability to form contracts, our ability to negotiate properly, our ability to be humble, to commit to other people, to listen to them, to empathize with them, to truly create a pathway forward that we all can walk together and create abundance with that. That's what made this country great 300 years ago, or sorry, 250 years ago, but certainly, before the revolution ever happened. This place was like a paradise compared to what we have now, at least when it comes to proper culture and social support. So yes, we got fancy knickknacks and cell phones, and I can talk to you guys through cameras and stuff like that, and that's great. I'm not saying that's a problem necessarily, but I'm saying the price of that was, the loss of our ability to be in community with each other, to the extent that I live in a neighborhood where I could like spit and hit the next house next to me, and I talked to that. I think I've maybe said 5 words to that person my entire time here. Now I try too. It's not like I'm like, I'm keeping my head down and not trying to say anything. I've made an effort to try to talk, but there's this deep kind of like aversion to getting to know people that has been built into our culture for a reason. It's because they can control us so much easier. So anyway, I've already gone off on massive tangents. How's it going, Camcast Hass? So we're moving now. So Ryan, he left yesterday in the U-Haul truck. He's going back up to Michigan. He's actually there right now. Thank God he managed to get there without much issue. He's got a lot to deal with. Ryan's unfortunately got an ailing mother with terminal cancer. And so our prayers go out to him for sure. He's literally in my prayers every day. So Vigilant News isn't going to go away necessarily. It's going to evolve, because at some point I'm going to be out of the studio I'm in right now. I'm going to be moving probably into, like, if I'm lucky, a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm going to have to get some kind of, normal job, which is fine. I'm willing to do almost anything for my family. So it's not like I'm not willing to do that, but it comes at a price, obviously, which means I can't sit here and pontificate about how much better community would be if we had it, kind of thing. So, but it's still, the show is still going to carry on in some form. So another life update I want to give you all is that I recently got ill again. So when the last show aired, which I believe was on the 13th, that was a pre-record that Ryan and I did. The previous Sunday, so this was on the 12th, I believe. No, I think it was on a Saturday. I had another like abdominal pain situation. Now, for those of you who don't know, back in late January of this year, I had some really intense abdominal pain. It turns out, I found out this time that was most likely appendix related. And this is let me finish the story. Sorry, I got off on a tangent already. So last year, late January, got abdominal pain, didn't know what it was. I assumed it was a gallstone. It was not a gallstone. I tried to treat it myself at home. Probably not the best of ideas, but stubbornness is a powerful thing. And because as I'm sure you guys would agree, I don't trust the medical system. I trust them to do some things, but it comes at a price. So anyway, I ended up going to the hospital after a couple weeks. Turns out I have a massive abscess in my body, like a basketball size abscess, not like literally the shape of a basketball, but like in volume. And that had curled around my psoas muscle and all sorts of craziness. And so I had to have a drain put in my body. I had that in my body for 7 weeks. And so it was quite the ordeal. And they basically said, like, frankly, you're lucky to be alive. Like, most of the time when people experience these issues, they're dead. So it's like, wow, that's pretty crazy. Thank God for that. So anyway, I dealt with that last year. By the time, April had turned around, I'd pretty much recovered. I couldn't do much physically, so I've had to kind of like sacrifice a lot of my workout and health routines a little bit to manage that situation. So anyway, flash to a couple weeks ago, I feel another very similar telltale sign that something's a little off in my in my abdominal cavity. So this time I don't wait around. I go like the next day because I'm feeling low energy. I've got shivers. I've got a fever. You know, the various signs that indicate to me that something's not right, and I might even have another abscess forming. Turns out I do. I went to the hospital. They did a CT scan. They found another pocket of fluid in almost exactly the same area. And this time they also said that I have what looks like a swollen appendix. Now, the surgeon I saw said that in his opinion, it is appendix related. I also informed him of another issue I had last year. So last year, in December, I was about to travel to California to do an event for a charity I was the president of at the time. And I felt a similar kind of abdominal pain, but I just chucked up the gas because it really just felt like a nasty gas pain. Now, what's interesting is I had felt similar abdominal pains way back, like when I was 17, 18, 19, that I chalked up to dehydration. And admittedly, when I would get dehydrated, I'd often have these weird abdominal pains. So I didn't know any better. I actually went to the doctor way back when I was a teen, and they didn't have any idea. They just gave me a bunch of narcotics, and thankfully that seemed to make it go away. But the problem never really got addressed. So anyway, this past time, the surgeon sees me a couple weeks ago, says, hey, you've got what looks like an appendix, and it might have already been perforated. And you might have actually already ruptured it. So basically, this is the crazy part. So just having the abscess from a few months ago, that is itself like a you should be dead now kind of a moment. But I'm not, by the grace of God. Then turns out, because they couldn't really make out for whatever reason in the CT scan what the cause of the abscess was. This time, though, they identified what looked like some type of appendix issue, that my appendix might have actually ruptured already, if it not this past time, way back when, and that might have been the cause. So not only did the abscess that should have killed me not kill me, but an appendix rupturing, which normally kills people, didn't kill people, or didn't kill me. So it's like, wow. I mean, I'm either really lucky or I'm supposed to be here doing something. That's the conclusion that a lot of people have shared with me, is that, listen, you must have some work to do here because you keep trying to get out of it, and God's like, get back in there. So admittedly, I'm not saying I've got any kind of divine intervention necessarily, but it is definitely in that category. We'll put it that way, and I'm certainly kind of treating it and receiving it that way. That this is something special that I don't want to just throw away. So anyway, turns out they did an appendicitis surgery. I had to have my appendix removed. He said that it did in fact look like it had ruptured, and here I am. So then everything I thought was all right, I got sent home. This was last week. A few days later, I started to get yet another signs of something. I started to get fever. I had really low energy. I couldn't really do much other than just like work for a couple hours and then just fall asleep for another couple hours. I had temperature issues. I go back into the hospital, and they find out that there's yet another abscess forming. And it's likely related to the fact that when the appendix surgery happened, I had some kind of infection in there. So right now I've got yet another drain inside me. I feel pretty good overall. I have low energy at times, so I have to just try to do as much work as I can and then not overdo it. But basically that's happening. And then what's really crazy is that, there's all this move stuff that's supposed to be happening. So normally when we move, I'm like the work mule. Like I'm basically doing everything with the exception of things I literally can't lift on my own. And now I can't really do any of that because the doctors say I can't lift more than like 25 pounds, which is, I'll have to trust them. I feel like I can do more work, but, my wife's like insistent, like, please do not hurt yourself again, which I'm going to honor that. So anyway, here we are. So that's the life update portion of the show. I appreciate all the love and support from everybody. I'll probably put out another update. I put out an update about the fact that I was sick again a couple of weeks ago. I did not put out an update about having to go back into the hospital for a second time. But, people have been very generous and supportive. If you're interested, you can see some of the more detailed stuff on my Give, Send, Go. if you go to my Substack, justindeschamps.substack.com, which you can access by going to vigilant.news for the show notes today. Inside that show notes, you can see the article Agenda 47 Explained Introduction. That's my Substack. You just got to click down to the life update or personal update. I can't remember what I called it, but in that is my Give, Send, Go. You can read more about that. If you want to, you can certainly, offer some prayers or a contribution. No pressure at all. I know we're all struggling, so, literally no pressure. It's just to let you know what's going on. So there we are. So that is the situation at hand. So a lot of stuff's happening. And I hope and pray that everything that needs to be done can be done swiftly and with minimal pain and suffering, and hopefully a little abundance and prosperity thrown in there. All right, so what we want to do next is I'm going to cover some news items, and then I'm going to let's see. I'll go ahead and read some of these articles that I have. So the first thing here, let's see. I don't know if let me actually grab this. Yeah, I'll just grab this one. So, Tulsi Gabbard, as you might have heard, has recently endorsed Trump. Obviously, the RFK situation from last week was pretty significant. We're going to be getting into a little bit of that news when we listen to, or we go over some of what Martin Armstrong was saying. But before we get into that, we're going to go ahead and play a few clips from the Vigilant News Telegram. So here we go.
To the brink of nuclear war than we ever have been before.
Oh, that was weird. Let me try that again.
To the brink of nuclear war than we ever have been before. This is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to doing all that I can to send President Trump back to the White House, where he can once again serve us as our commander-in-chief. Because I am confident that his first task will be to do the work to walk us back from the brink of war. We cannot be prosperous unless we are at peace. And we can't live free as long as we have a government that is retaliating against its to the brink of nuclear war. Then,
all right, so there you go. That's her endorsement. Let's skip down to, where is it? Here we go. So we had some really great clips from a Sean Ryan interview with Trump that I'm assuming came out somewhat recently. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this one.
Don't forget, I beat Nancy Pelosi. I beat all these people, every one of them. And somebody said, if you look at it, he beat the Clinton family, right? And that was really Obama too, because he was behind her 100% like he was running. And I beat the Bush family. I beat everybody. And now I beat Biden. I got him out. I beat him twice, actually. I beat him the first time, but now I beat him a second time because it was the debate that got him out. And now I have to beat somebody that nobody ever heard of, who's a Marxist. And I think I'll be able to do that. But I know the people now. I've been in government now for 8 years. I was in government for no years. I became president and I said, I've never done this before. It's pretty, sort of a miracle. In the history of our country, we had 92% politicians become president and 8% generals. Not admirals, but generals, only generals. So those were the only two, politicians and generals. George Washington, Dwight Eisenhower. Actually, he was very good, very strong on the borders. Eisenhower was strong on the borders, a moderate guy, but very, very strong on the borders. He had big deportation. But 92% was politicians. and 8%, there was nobody else. And then I came along. And so people were surprised. But I know the system, I know the people, I know some great people, and I know some people that I wouldn't put in. But you learn that. And so now I'm a very experienced guy, and we're going to bring our country back. And we're respected. We're going to be respected again with other countries. Don't forget, I had no wars other than I defeated ISIS, but that war was already started. That war was raging for 20 years before I got there. And I ended that war in 3 or 4 weeks. So, you know, a lot of people give me credit, even people that don't love me, as being a great president, because we did a lot. Right to try. I got right to try for people that are terminally ill, where they can use space age medicines. We have the best labs and the best doctors in the world. But you couldn't use it because, you know, you just couldn't use it. You weren't allowed to use it. And I got that done, where you can use these space age that won't be approved by the FDA for a long time, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I've saved thousands and thousands of lives. But now I know the system, and I know Washington, and I know the people, and I hope we win. And if we do win, we're going to make this country greater than ever before.
There he is. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything he said. And, you know, he really did defeat Trump, not only Obama, but Clinton. That's what Pepe Lives Matter has to say. It says, Trump says he destroyed the Clinton political dynasty, the Bush dynasty, the Obama dynasty, the Biden dynasty, and now he's going to beat Marxist Kamala Harris, that no one has ever heard of. He says it's sort of a miracle how he was able to defeat all these lifelong politicians at their own game, and that he's been in government for 8 years and knows the system better than ever before, so he can make America great again than ever before with the right people. So I agree with a lot of what he's saying there, and this is kind of tying into the article I just released, Agenda 47 Explained Introduction. Now, in that's just the introduction. That I'm going to be releasing, you know, probably something like 20 of these things if I can manage to make the time. Although I might condense it a bit, and it's just for so that it's not like an endless series. But the point is that in my opinion, and I think a lot of people agree with this, especially people who've been following our favorite military insiders, I like to say, as we like to say on the show, which is that I don't think Trump was the, you know, green around the ears president that he often makes himself out to be. I think optics are necessary, and that I would argue he was doing an entrapment in his first term. So, you know, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a decent amount of people say like, oh, well, Trump surrounded himself with neocons, with neolibs. You know, he had bad people in his administration. He had Fauci, he had Birx, all these different people, right? And for that reason, he was not able to capitalize on all the potential things he could have done in his first term. I don't necessarily know if Trump was like blissfully unaware of these things. I don't think he's like, well, I don't know anything about government. I'm just going to go in there and, you know, hopefully, gee willikers, hopefully I get the right people next to me and we can make good things happen. What I actually think is that Trump was playing dumb in a way and allowing the deep state to think that he was in over his head. I don't know if that's true or not. You know, my opinion is that Trump is working with a positive faction of the military and the intelligence apparatus, who arguably have been working to slowly but surely develop enough cohesion so that eventually they could topple the globalist empire. And I think there's good reason to believe that that's happening, and that's what they've been working towards. So from a optics perspective, because you can't just, I would say, you can't just run in there with bull in a china shop, start, you know, gutting the deep state and ripping people out, because the people would see that and the media would sell that to the people as a coup, and that Trump would be using a military coup type situation. So they had to use a much slower process. But now that Trump is seen in a lot of ways as a kind of expert, which is, you know, pretty powerful when it comes to persuasion, that he went from somebody who knows nothing to a guy who successfully defeated all these, you know, Clinton dynasty, Obama dynasty, Biden dynasty, and now he's going to defeat the Harris dynasty, if there ever was such a thing. Now it'll be a lot easier for him to go in there because he's got the support of the people. He has a true mandate of the people. He probably had one before, but people didn't realize the extent to which the corruption, how deep it was until now. And I think that's what Agenda 47 is going to be all about. Agenda 47, based on my reading of it, has an incredible ability to deal significant death blows to the entrenched deep state apparatus that is way older than people think. Like, you might think, oh, well, you know, things were good back in the 60s, but, you know, it's gone downhill from there. It's like, no. This thing has been building momentum, and the globalist scheming, you know, which they weren't necessarily called globalists back then, but we'll just go with that term for now, has been around for a very long time. I would say at least 500 years. Probably more like, you know, the early traces of it probably go back thousands of years. But this modern day iteration, I believe at some point probably started somewhere in Venice in Italy, probably somewhere in it could have been as early as the 800s, or at least those early beginning traces, because the legal system we use today came from the Carolingian legal system, you know, estates and roles and all these different things that have kind of carried on throughout somewhat modern history over the past 1,200 years or so. That came from the Carolingian Empire back in the 800s. So, you know, and that was corrupted within a couple hundred years. It had been corrupted. So, you know, as some good folks over at Breaking History talk about, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry and Matthew Arrett, the history is not as cut and dry as we might think. So anyway, all right, I'm going to play the next video from that clip with Trump. This one's a pretty good one too. Let's take a listen.
I have one last question. I think that one of the biggest problems within the country is the distrust in the United States government. I'm one of them. I have zero trust in any government agencies. I have zero trust in our Congress and our Senate, anything. We have a government that's not functioning right now.
Yeah.
How are you going to gain the trust back of the American people within the government? And are we going to see anybody held accountable?
Yeah. The answer is yes on the second. They're going to be held accountable. They've got to be held accountable. What they're doing, they're destroying this country. They're crooked people. They're dishonest people. They're going to be held accountable. But what I find is, so when I came to Washington, you know, I won an election that everybody said, they thought I was just going to have some fun. Everyone said, he's got too good a life. I did. I had the greatest life. I went from that to having bullets shot at me, okay? I had the greatest life. And they said, would you do it again? I said, without question, because we're going to save the country. It's much more important than I had a good life. A lot of people have a good life. It's like not the same thing. We're going to make America great again. Literally, we're going to make America greater than ever before. If we don't do it this time, we'll never be able to do it. It'll be too late. It'll be too far gone. But we're going to have great people. When I came in originally, I didn't know anybody in Washington. You know, I was only there 17 times. You may have heard me say this. I never stayed over. I built a hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, which was a great hotel and very successful, and then sold it. And then what happened is I didn't really know anybody in Washington. I was a New York person. I wasn't like a Washington, D.C. person. And all of a sudden I'm president and I'm driving down Pennsylvania Avenue with more police and motorcycles and military than I've ever seen before in my life. I said to my wife, do you believe this? I'm president. But I didn't know anybody in Washington. And I had to rely on people to give me names. And many were really good. I mean, Bob Lighthizer, I had great trade people. I had some great people. But I also picked people that, in retrospect, I wouldn't have picked. But now I know the smart ones, the dumb ones, the weak ones, the solid ones, the ones like you. I know the people. I know everybody, sort of like everybody. And we're going to have a great government. I didn't know. I had to rely on people I'd ask, I don't want to use names because I don't want to embarrass. They're not bad people, but I'd ask people that were rhinos, who do you recommend for such and such a position? All important positions. And they'd recommend some people that were rhinos or something, or weak or not good. And I don't have to ask too much right now. I know the people, and I've known them through fighting and wars. I've known them through because all this stuff. I had great support.
All right, so there you go. That kind of goes along with what we were saying earlier, that he knew that he had to bait the deep state basically and get them to believe that, you know, he was green around the ears, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he had to ask these people because that's the way these things work. If we were living in a true democratic republic or whatever, I don't even know what words necessarily to be used, but I would say a true trust-based and honor-based society, I'm going to call it that, then you wouldn't have to scratch somebody's back to do the right thing. They would want to do the right thing implicitly. You know, just to go off on a little spiritual, religious tangent here, but this is important because it's at the foundations of what makes civilization what it is. Civilization is the human enterprise. God said, I would believe, that be ye perfect even as your heavenly Father is perfect. That means life is about pursuing excellence. And I think that's exactly what life is all about. When you really try to be the best and to do the best you can, what happens? You reap the rewards of being the best you can. You know, if you really try to be good to your business partner or your wife or your children, you're honest about your mistakes, you talk through them, you empathize, it's not just about intention, like I want to do good, but with that intention, I'm screwing everybody over left and right. It's like you have the intention, you have the thought, you have the right emotionality that backs that intention, which should probably be something like humility and compassion and dedication and commitment. And then you have the right action that goes on top of that. When you have that trifecta, that pyramid, the thought, emotion, and action, then what you get is you get excellence. And to use a sports analogy, you know, if you're an Olympic gymnast, you know, you might have the intention to be a good Olympic gymnast. Well, you got to manage your emotions, right? What happens when you fall the first time when you try to do a trick? You're going to get a little disillusioned, aren't you? So you need to understand, like, hey, this is part of the process. If the only way I can move forward is if it's perfect when I think it needs to be, then I'm probably not going to do it. But the pursuit of perfection is something different than being a perfectionist. The pursuit of perfection is I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. It's in the process of trying again and again and again and again and again, and using the right mind, a rational, logical process that allows me to discern what the right choices are, despite that panoply of mistakes. Then I can actually start to gain a little bit of wisdom. Like, well, once I've learned how to do a triple Lundy or whatever the heck it is they do in gymnastics, then you've learned how to do it. You've got the recipe because you've carefully worked out what that recipe is. And then you can keep adding on to that. And before you know it, you're at the Olympic level. So I think civilization is the same way. We all have to have the right intention, trust, honor, duty, commitment, you know, transparency. People who actually want what's best for other people. That's what a trustee is that when you're in government, you're not working for yourself, your own personal interests, unless you're in a tyrannical government, which is frankly all we have on this planet right now, I'd argue. But instead, you're working to serve other people, which is what I think Donald Trump is all about. You know, do we know for sure? Well, you know, not really. Let's be honest. Like, I don't necessarily know exactly what Trump is doing behind the scenes. I'm not there. But if his public expression is anything like what his backroom, you know, what's happening in private, then he really does care. And we've played that. There's a movie, The Great American Patriot, by Mr. Truthbomb. Fantastic movie. You know, either he's the greatest con man on earth and he's been doing good deeds to try to build up a false image so that he can screw us all over later, which I don't necessarily think is the case, but, you know, I can't discount that possibility. Or he really is who we think he is. He really is a good guy who actually wants to do what's right by people, but what's right by God, and really make this country great again. That's what I think is happening. If there's, other than just a little doubt, because I can't see behind every corner, everything I can see what Trump has been doing has been aligning with that. So imagine if everybody in government, not just at the congressional level or in the executive branch or in the judicial branch, so not like the head of government in the United States, the federal government. I'm talking about like everywhere, in your school board, in your police, you know, in your church, everywhere where other people's rights are being managed by other people, because that's really what government is all about. You know, we can use a different term, but basically this is the way society is. This is what the social contract is all about, that, you know, the philosophers of old were talking about here back in the Enlightenment period. when you're in a family, you have only a certain amount of power. And your ability to claim the best life possible relies on you working with other people in a trust-based capacity, that you're going to be honest about what you really intend to do, that you're going to genuinely try to do what's good for yourself and good for other people, and sit down and talk about and negotiate how to actually achieve that, which is not necessarily easy. You can't just like intend to do the best thing and then like, well, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to like remodel that bathroom without having to ask my parents that that's what I want to do. And then your mother's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you know, I love that bathroom and you tore it all up to turn it into this whatever. So you got to communicate. Trust doesn't mean trying to do something good and then just winging it and hoping it works out. Trust means intending on doing something good, communicating that, verifying, so trust but verify, and then also building with that a compromise, a good plan, a plan of action that you can actually use and implement, so that when you go to do that thing that you think is going to be good, it actually is good, in the sense that you've talked to all the people that are going to be affected by your actions and gain their consent and trust. That, what I just described, if we even add 10% more of that in our world, the world would be phenomenally better. And I think this is the destiny of humanity. I think we were meant to live that life that I just described. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he talks about the kingdom of heaven. That, you know, with our ability to live out God's will and bring heaven to earth is not just some pie in the sky thing where we hope, you know, we pray long enough and then Jesus snaps his fingers and we all get whisked away to some paradise, never having to worry about anything ever again. I don't think that's the case. What I think is the case is that we already have the tools. We already have the tools in hand. We just need to actually learn how to use them right and have faith in each other to use them right, just like the founding fathers did when they came here. And look at what they were able to do in this short period of time. We can do the same thing here with this country. And I personally think that's exactly what is about to happen. We're about to pass through the eye of the needle. And once we're on the other side of that, it's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of, you know, coming to Jesus moments we're going to have to accept. Just thinking about all the ways that we've been conscripted into doing things we might not wanted it to. But we'll have an incredible ability and chance to really make this world into something far more splendid and glorious and divine than it ever has been before. And I'm not talking about some communist utopia. I'm talking about, you know, what I think God truly intended for us. So anyway, there's one rant for the day for you. All right, so let me move over to the other news items I have. So let's see. So this is a really cool interview. I wish I had more time to talk about it, because there's about 50 minutes of it, and it seems like it's a really good one. By the way, I'm also going to, let me do this. Let's switch over here before we get to the interview. All right, everybody. So we are sponsored by Ascent Nutrition. Ascent Nutrition is one of the pioneers and the pillars of quality nutrition. I work for the company. I know the person who founded it. I've researched the heck out of it for years. I mean, I've known about Ascent Nutrition from kind of like the first few fledgling months that he got started. And Lance started Ascent Nutrition because he had a genuine intention to try to make people healthy again, just like RFK was talking about. And we actually have a lot of incredible tools. You know, we have things like pine needle extract, which you can use to help restore your health in a bunch of different ways. So that's what this guy is right here. So pine needle extract, it's wild harvested, which means it's basically organic, even better than organic, because, you know, when things are grown organic these days, there's 700 different chemicals in the United States that you can pour on organic food and call it organic. So is it really organic? I don't know. I would say this is probably more close to what God intended, because it's in nature. It's not immune from toxin necessarily, but from what I've been told, it's some of the purest compounds you can get your hands on. And pine needle extract can help you support your lung health, brain health, nervous system health. So I have to be careful about my words here, because I don't want to get Lance in trouble. But basically, a lot of the biowarfare shenanigans that have been thrown at us, especially after COVID, you know, anybody remember something that was mandatory that when people took it, they'd have lots of nasty complications and long COVID and, turbo cancers, and suddenly things would happen, myocarditis, all that. Well, all that's because of something called spike protein. But there was a compound that Judy Mikovits talked about in pine needle tea that would help neutralize some of that stuff. And so Lance, in his, insight, decided, hey, I'm going to develop not only a product like this, but I'm going to develop the cleanest one and the most affordable one that I can. And that's exactly what he did. So you don't have to mess around with buying pine needles and hoping that they came from a good source and maybe not doing the tea right or all that kind of stuff, or then it tasting really funky. Because I've never had authentic pine needle tea before, but from what I've heard, it can not be the tastiest thing in the world. But he produced a product that, and it basically tastes like caramel. So it tastes really good, and it has incredible benefits. And it has an active compound called shikemic acid in it. So shikemic acid is the active ingredient in Tamiflu. So they, as in the medical industry, has already kind of acknowledged the benefit of the things that are in pine needles. Pine needles have been used as ancient medicine for a very long time. And now there's an actual really amazing product you can use to get yourself back on track to your health. So you can go to, in the link in the description, there's a Agarikon, so I'll talk about that, but you can use that Agarikon link to get to this one. And when you make a purchase using that link, it supports this show. So I also want to talk about Agarikon. That's, where is it here? There it is. So Agarikon mushroom, this was studied by the DoD. And Paul Stamets famously talked about it on Joe Rogan, I think it was like 8 years ago now, that the biodefense program for the military, the DoD, Department of Defense, was looking to find out, well, what can we give our soldiers to protect them from all the biowarfare garbage that's floating around out in the world? Because, if we know about all the biowarfare, that there's probably a lot more out there that we might not know about. So they decided on this compound, apparently. They studied a whole bunch of different compounds. The thing that they decided would be some of the best out there is Agarikon mushroom. Turns out that it wasn't necessarily meant to come out publicly because they didn't want one of their greatest defenses to be publicly known, as you might imagine. And despite that, though, you can get Agarikon mushroom. Now, I've used Agarikon mushroom, several times, and it really does work. It's pumped the brakes on some respiratory stuff I had going on for a while there. So you can get yourself some Agarikon mushroom. Again, link in the description. You can use that link to get anything you want. Use promo code Justin Stillness, JUSTINSTILLNESS, Justin Stillness, and you can save 10%. And anytime you get anything on Ascent, if you do the subscribe and save, you're not only going to get 10% off, but you'll also get free shipping. So it's a really good deal. All right, so let's look over at what we got going on with this article here. So we're looking at serious civil unrest regardless of who wins. This is Martin Armstrong saying this. So Martin Armstrong is known as the most successful economic forecaster in history. There's actually a movie called Forecaster. You can watch his life story. So I think the story is, I might have some of the timing off a little bit, but he developed this program called Socrates all the way back in like the late 80s, I want to say, or 90s. Although he was in finance and trade and things like this for a while now. So he already had a pretty good reputation. And he developed this program called Socrates, which was a kind of early AI, and it was able to successfully predict market trends. It was so successful that it was able to predict a whole bunch of different other things, like, military incursions or wars and stuff like that. So you imagine in the modern age, we've got the deep state. The deep state is manipulating and messing with, political establishments, fomenting wars, doing all sorts of shenanigans with the CIA and the intelligence apparatus. So when their plans are getting hinted at or exposed in some capacity by a guy with an AI program, they're like, what is this guy using? Like, what's going on here? We need to get a hold of that. So they told, I believe it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, like they were like, hey, Martin, you need to give us your source code. And if you give us your source code, we'll leave you alone. But if you don't, it's not going to be a good thing for you. And Martin was like, F you, I'm not giving you my source code. That's my source code. And so they trumped up some coin charge, which you can read about on Wikipedia, and threw him in jail for 11 years. And so, as you might imagine, they probably throughout that 11 years said, hey, if you just give us the source code, everything's going to be okay. Hunky-dory, you get to go back to your old life. And he said, F you, I'm not giving you the source code. I don't care what you threaten me with. So right there, I've got a lot of respect for the guy. Well, he gets out in 2011, and he now, he's still got his source code, and he's been using it ever since. And so when he says things like, we're looking at serious civil unrest, regardless who wins, we should take this seriously because he's got a very good track record. So I'm going to play just a little bit of this video. Where is it here? Down here. Just so you guys can get a little taste of who he is, and then I'll read some of the key points from this article.
Here's how to add a beautiful fountain to any outdoor space in just seconds without any tools or electricity. If you're looking stop buying weak and boring lighters. Check out this new incredible fire
Can't have Rumble without
this insane
to work through. Okay, here we go.
I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. For the next few weeks, I'm going to be just doing interviews on Friday, not the weekly news wrap-up, so I have to get a really good guest. And I have that in Martin Armstrong at Armstrong Economics with the Socrates computer program. Rarely wrong. He's in international demand, a consultant for just about everybody around the world who's anybody in government and otherwise. But Martin Armstrong, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Oh, it's good to see you again.
I want to start with this because this is why I called you. I mean, I've never seen people question the polls as much as they do now on lying legacy media. I've never seen them do that. I mean, Jesse Waters was like, wow, they're oversampling Democrats. And, you're hearing that, you're hearing stuff like this. Just a few days ago, Harris leads Trump by 6 points nationally before Democratic National Convention, and I'm sure she's going to get a huge bump after the hate fest that they're calling a convention up in Chicago. But I asked you, could you run the numbers for Socrates like you did with Biden, her approval rating? My friend did this that I've been comparing you to double source this with, and he said, I just ran them. They're at about 8.5 to 9%, somewhere in that neighborhood. Did you run these numbers? What are her real approval ratings? It isn't 45, 50%.
No, it came in around 10.5. And I think you got to question what they're doing when you just look at the Gallup poll. And they basically have put down confidence in governments at 7%. So how can she possibly be 40, 50, 60%? I mean, it's illogical. Just completely illogical.
So when you see these polls where, Kamala, she's winning in the swing stakes, or she's only down by 2, or she's only up by 3, or that, what are they doing? What is this just, the polls are just propaganda at this point, are they not?
Yeah. Look, they were propaganda basically back in 2016. They all said that Hillary was going to win, was going to be, she was going to sweep basically Trump underneath the carpet. The same thing they were doing in London with Brexit. In fact, Nigel Farage came down and spoke at our 2019 conference in Rome. And he said, of course he was there. He said, we were the only ones that even said he was going to win. Every poll said he would lose. Look, if you did a poll and say, this 10,000 people have been sampled. Yes, but that's very nice. But if they're all in Washington, D.C., I think, okay, fine. Trump's going to have maybe 5%, All
right, so there you go. That's a little sample of Martin Armstrong. That's a 50-minute interview. So if you want to watch the whole thing, I suggest you go to vigilant.news. And go to the show notes for today for the 26th of August, 2024. You can also just go right to the link in the description. So let me get to some of that. So we just talked about the polls. So this is the one on RFK. So just as a preamble to this, for those of you who don't know, I'd be surprised if you guys don't know this, but RFK Jr. was endorsed by Trump. I believe this happened on Friday. I'm sorry, Trump, RFK Jr. endorsed Trump. So he suspended his campaign, RFK Jr. suspended his campaign, and he endorsed Trump. And it was a pretty big deal. Like, it kind of sent shockwaves out throughout the news sphere, the political verse. And I think part of the reason why is that, you know, as much as people might want to downplay RFK Jr. has a lot of clout. He's obviously the son of RFK. He's the nephew of JFK. And he's been a very principled man, kind of exposing the medical industrial complex, particularly about Fauci, but a bunch of different things for like 20 years now. And then before that, he was trying to clean up the environment. So he seems, if the stories that we've heard about him are accurate, he seems to be a pretty principled guy. Now, I watched his speech where he suspends his campaign, and he's like, he tears up during his speech a few times. Which is, you know, some people might be like, well, anybody can learn like the method and learn how to tear up. And fair point, absolutely. But I get the impression that he was being genuine, or at least that's one interpretation that we can make. Whether or not that's the absolute truth, who knows? But again, multivariate thinking, omniological process. We look at all the different possibilities and we consider each one. So if I consider the fact that he was being genuine, then I think RFK Jr. really is and was and going to get into politics because he wanted to actually try to bring some sanity back to the arenas of health. And anybody who's spent any time dealing with health in their lives in this country knows that it is one of the biggest rackets. It's filled with technicians. I don't even call them doctors, because a doctor, I would say, at least in the, you know, the sense that you might hear about or see in TV shows like ER, you know, there's people that are pretty intelligent, know a bunch of different things, and actually are able to think critically and discern, you know, what's going on. Most doctors don't do that. Most doctors they have the title of doctor, and I just dealt with a bunch of them, so I know. And I'm not saying they're bad people necessarily. I think most people in the medical profession genuinely are in there because they want to help people and they have good intentions. But it's an institution, and any institution that exerts incredible ideological control over its adherents and its members will, in doing so, basically compromise those people and prevent them from doing as much good as they could. Hold on one second. I thought I was going to sneeze. Okay. So I think RFK left because he realized, and this is what he said, so I'm just quoting him basically, that he was not going to be able to win the White House. At best, he would be, I forget the terminology he used, but he'd be somebody who influences the election but doesn't actually win because he draws votes from the two sides. And he genuinely wanted to try to get in there to address this medical industrial complex. And he spent a lot of time quoting, I forget their names, but it's like Callie and Carrie or something like that. They were recently on Tucker. I watched like 80% of it with my wife. It was a riveting Tucker episode. And they're talking about the insanity of the medical industrial complex and that they want to put all these obese people on Ozempic, and Ozempic injections, mind you, cost like $1,500 a month. Ultra-processed foods everywhere. So stuff I've known about, at least in general, not the Ozempic part. That's a somewhat new thing. But the idea that our food has been weaponized. That's stuff I've known about for a long time, and I'm sure you guys have known about it too. It's like you spend half a minute trying to research, you know, even a few of the ingredients in your food, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, like polysorbate 80, like, you know, monosodium glutamate, all the various food dyes, you know, added sugar, hyper-processed carbohydrates, you know, pesticides, all sorts of things that are in the food. And you're like, what in the hell is going on? Like, why do we need all this? You know, and that's usually sold to us as like, well, we had a green revolution back in the 40s and 50s through petrochemical fertilizers. We were able to greatly expand the food yield, which it seems like in some parts that's true. However, and I've talked to several people about this, I think there's a case to be made for the fact that we can do almost as well with various forms of rejuvenative farming, biodynamic farming, organic farming, permaculture, all this kind of stuff that would basically eliminate the need to use massive things like that. The other problem is that when you have food grown in this capacity, it has to sit somewhere for a while until people want it. And so you have to have, and I think this is part of the whole game, you have to have some amount of processing to deal with that food. Because if you grow like 50 million tons of soybean or peanuts or corn or whatever, it's got to sit somewhere in a silo. It's going to get moldy, as it should if it's real food. And then now you've got to deal with this moldy food. Can you even do anything with it? And to be honest with you, it's not. Like when I was a kid, I was like, mold, who gives a damn? I'm just going to eat it anyway. But then I did a bunch of research on mycotoxins, and I realized, like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we've got like thousands of different forms of mycotoxins, which mycos basically stands for mycelium. So toxins that come from the fungal side of life. There's, plant or vegetable, there's animal, and then there's fungal, mushrooms. And you got these main three that are dominating all over the place on the planet Earth. And this fungal part is supposed to break down things so that it can be reintroduced into the soil and that it can grow, vegetables again, and then things can be done with that. So anyway, the long story short, our food is so horribly toxic. And if we had good methodologies, we could have incredibly healthy food. And that's something that RFK talks about. So when he dropped out of the race to endorse Trump, it was a big deal. And I could seemingly tell that he was really moved by the situation. When he went to go speak at the Trump rally, I believe it was on Friday night, he wasn't like hyped up necessarily. It wasn't like, woo, woo, yeah. But he was definitely like touched by it. And I think he was also it was a little bittersweet from him because he genuinely wanted to do a lot of things as president that I don't think he knows he can't do. But I'm not so sure if he's fully abreast of the degree to which the deep state plan, to the extent that Trump is, the deep state plan has taken over our world. Now, one last thing I'll say on this whole Kennedy thing is that the Kennedys are hardly like a blemishless family. The Kennedys are seemingly one of the middle tier managers that was reared up during the Prohibition era. The Prohibition era, you got to hand it to the cabal. If you read anything about that, look at, what's her name? Whitney Webb and her book, One Nation Under Blackmail, especially the first volume. And you start to get a sense of how sophisticated the operation was. I would argue an international banking funded operation with all the various tentacles of the British intelligence apparatus reaching in there to basically create a whole new middle tier. So you imagine, I'm going to use an analogy here. Imagine that the banking classes, it's like a form of magic, because when the banks inject money into a space in our economy, you've got opportunists, people, like could be like regular schmoes that want to carve out a piece of their pie for themselves and better their family. And so you have this hand that has the ability to extend banking capital out from itself. Then the soil from which that hand is extended into is an economically depreciated soil. This is why if you're going to use the mechanism I'm talking about right now, it's not about just dumping money into a situation. You have to use black markets. You have to use rebels. You have to use, invasion and subversion of the legal system so that you can have artificially inflated economies in one area and depreciation in another area. So that basically what you have is a large, massively economically depressed population that is willing to do almost anything so that they can reach out and grab that carrot that's extending from the hand of the British intelligence international banking class. And that's exactly what they did. Right after the Federal Reserve, isn't it interesting? They had the Panic of 1907. Panic of 1907 caused J.P. Morgan as the proxy, and then, the Rockefeller Rothschild clan, because the Rockefellers are apparently just a branch of the Rothschild family. They bought up 80% of the U.S. industry economy. So 80% of businesses, companies, industry all went bankrupt in the Panic of 1907. J.P. Morgan bailed them out, which basically means he bought them for pennies on the dollar, and then they were under his control, just like BlackRock and Vanguard today, except it was a lot more apparent back then. Then what do you have happen? You got World War I. Right after World War I, what do you have happen? After they've consolidated power and they've really entrenched everybody, they've got most people now on the teat of the international banking class. You know, before 1907, a good chunk of businesses had cash reserves. They didn't need bankers because they were actually taking profits and putting it aside and being like, we can use our own money. We don't need to spend, you know, money at interest to fund business ventures and aspects like this. We could stockpile our own money, and we're able to operate independent of the banking class. But once the bankers came in and they bail out your economy, well, what happens? It's just like today. If you want to be in big business, what do you got to do? You got to play the DEI, ESG, globalist nonsense game in order to get anywhere in the economy. And so which basically means is that you have to sell your soul to prosper in business. That's exactly the point. So when you have this hand of the international banking class reach in and start to drip out finance and money in this economically depreciated situation, what do? You got families, people, mobsters, you know, or maybe even agents that know this is going to happen, and they're right there to reach up, and then they become the new middle tier managers, the mercenary class of the next era. And that's exactly what happened with the Prohibition era. You had alcohol being illegalized or prohibited, and so you couldn't buy it legally. But so what happened? They just turned it into a black market affair. It pushed it right into the hands of criminals. Those same criminal families became massive industrialists. Then everything was legalized, and it's like, well, I've got all this money now, so it's great. Now, instead of being a criminal thug like I was before the Prohibition era, now I'm like, you know, right up there with the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies and all these kind of things. And that's where the Bronfmans came from. And then the Bronfmans later got into petrochemical pharmaceuticals. So, so the Kennedys were part of that, is what I was getting at. So anyway, so let's get back to this article again. So RFK, or Martin Armstrong says this: I was always pushing RFK to be Attorney General. I think I got his eyes to light up when I said, you take the Attorney General job, you could even indict Pfizer. And he's absolutely right. You know, the Attorney General has way, way more power than we might like to think. And a lot of attorneys general have a lot of power. That's why Kamala Harris was an attorney general. That's why most, you know, with so much money Soros and his ilk pays to make sure that stooges get into the attorney general's job. It's because basically the laws in the books mean nothing unless you've got a prosecutor who's willing to actually prosecute. So, and for most of the country's modern day history, we've never really had any prosecutors worth a damn, worth their salt, worth the breath that they breathe into their lungs to actually do anything for this country other than just act as agents for the deep state. And so now imagine if you have RFK. RFK can do two major things with this. He could begin to start prosecuting the pharmaceutical industry for the laundry list of crimes against humanity that I think that they've got going for them. And he could start to hold other prosecutors accountable, because the Attorney General, as far as I understand, is really high in the chain of command when it comes to, you know, the legal machine that is spread across our country. And this is part of what restoring the rule of law is all about, is that the laws on the books, yeah, those need to be adjusted for sure. I'll be the first one to tell you. But we've got enough on the books, because this is the way the cabal works. They put laws on the books to make you feel good. Like, look at all these great laws we just passed. They're great. What they don't tell you is they have no intention of actually using them to prosecute anybody. But with somebody like RFK in that position, he could do more in that position than he probably could ever do in the presidency. So I think this is a brilliant move, not only on RFK's part, but on Trump's part too, because politically, you get all of the glory that, or at least a good chunk of it. I mean, there are people that just hate Trump because he did the vaccine thing, and they're like, I don't care how great Trump is, like, he supported vaccines and I hate him for that reason. It's like, hey, I get it. I don't like the vaccines either, but, you know, this is a battle in a wartime situation. I think, you know, we gotta be strategic about this, which unfortunately includes making calculated losses that have collateral damage. That's just the reality of war. But anyway, so I think RFK could be a really good position. On Trump winning, he says, look, the computer, so he asks Armstrong, the interviewer asks Armstrong, what does the computer tell you about Trump? Is he going to win or not? And he says, look, the computer says Trump should win. I don't know how the hell they'll allow that to happen. They have to trap Trump into a war, or they'll kill him, or one or the other. These people are inconsignable. We're looking at serious civil unrest regardless of who wins in November. Neither side is going to accept it. And I think he's right. You know, I've been trying to figure out, like, well, what are they going to do? Because in my opinion, I think they've kind of acknowledged the fact that Trump's probably going to win. Now, they're trying to do this whole poll shenanigans right now where, you know, they're like, oh, look, Harris has got like 40% and, you know, 40, 50% in the polls, and she's like neck and neck with Trump. And it's like, yeah, give me a break. Nobody really wants that. I'll show you guys a video of the Nelk Boys, and they did a prank on somebody, put a Harris sign in her driveway, and she was not happy. I personally do not know anybody who really supports Harris. I know people who don't like Trump and who will likely support Harris for that reason, but nobody really wants Harris. And, you know, I don't think they're really going to have a leg to stand on with that. So before we get to another video, I want to show you guys. Let me continue on with this. So gold hit $2,500 an ounce. I believe it was like 10 days ago, something like that, which is no small thing. And he says something that's really important here. He says, there's a big war. The U.S. will default on its debt. I'm very concerned they'll start World War III before the end and maybe by September. Oh, he says it in the interview, but I guess they didn't capture it in the quotes here. But basically what he's talking about is, you know, people buy gold for several different reasons. They're not necessarily buying gold because they're trying to make money. They're buying gold because there's instability in the markets and they need to put their money somewhere safe, because we live in an inflationary economy. As anybody knows, you can't just take your life savings and chuck it under your mattress and think that's going to be a good idea, because what that means is that your dollars, you only have so many dollars. If you have $100,000 in your mattress, at the end of a 30-year period, that same $100,000 will have half its buying power, you know, something ludicrous like that, especially if the inflation numbers that we've seen recently continue on, which has been, I don't know what the exact numbers are now, because you have to consider all the manipulation they do with the numbers, but it's pretty significant. We're at the very least on average somewhere in the 5 to 6%, probably more like higher than that, probably more like 8, 9%. So what that means is that over the course of 30 years, you've got 5% inflation. Let's just say 5% inflation over 30 years. That means over 15 years, you've got a good amount, 10% every year. So you've got a significant amount of inflation. Now, it doesn't accrue stack to the extent that you're getting negative values, but it means that the chunks of value coming out of your dollar, imagine 10% every year. 10%, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Before you know it, a gallon of milk costs $20, or your car costs $150,000, or you're buying a house at $2 million that was worth $250,000 30 years beforehand, which is kind of the way it's worked. Like, you know, my parents bought their first house for like 70 grand in the 80s. And when they sold it in 2001, I believe, it was worth $450,000. So that's inflation for you. That's housing market for you. And to Tucker Carlson's point, you've got all these illegals coming in. They're getting housing vouchers. They're getting housing guaranteed, so that, you know, there's an incentive with respect to the housing market to bring in all these people in. Kamala Harris is talking about giving blanket amnesty to all sorts of people, so that these people could become citizens if she wins the presidency. And now they're going to have the same rights to housing that we do, except they're illegals and they might have other advantages that we don't. So there's a reason you want to have a somewhat isolationist economy, especially in this world. And this is something that I'm talking about in the series I'm doing about Agenda 47. You know, Trump's decisions about what he wants to do to make America great again and save his country are not like him just spitting at the wall and hopefully it sticks. He's making decisions because we live in a manipulated global economy, and that means we have to create an isolationist kind of immune system bubble with respect to our economy in the United States, or the tentacles of the international bankers and all their manipulations that they've been carefully scheming and wheeling and dealing for a very long time, and they're very good at it, can undermine economic prosperity very quickly, because economic prosperity is very delicate. You know, it's just like a farm. You know, your farm's only as prosperous until your next blight, or your next water shortage, or your next mold bloom, or something like that. And then everything goes tits up and you can't do much of anything. So it's a delicate thing, just like a marriage, just like a lot of other things. We live in a universe that has a narrow path woven thread throughout the center of it, which means if you want to enjoy the best things that life has to offer, you're walking on the path of a razor's edge in a lot of different ways. All right, so I'm going to show you this video I just thought was funny. Let's see. Here we go.
Hi. Hello there. Hi. I work for the Harris and Waltz campaign. Take it off. Take it off. No, I'm going to leave it there because...
No, you're not going to leave it there.
Oh, why?
Because I can't stand them.
Do you not support tampons in men's bathrooms?
No, I don't support tampons in men's bathrooms.
Why?
Because tampons are for women. Where are they going to stick it? Up their ass? Get it the fuck out of here.
Well,
Get it out of my property.
It looks good there, though. Wait, don't touch my sign. That's my sign.
I don't give a shit. They're a bunch of fucking communists.
You didn't address me by my pronouns.
What are you, a he, she? Fucking transgender is what you are.
I'm two-spirit.
So I should have probably put a language warning on that, but you guys get it. You know, and it's a little, you know, I don't know if putting signs on people's things as a prank is such a good idea, but it exemplifies a sentiment that I think is gripped our nation, which is that most people do not want a Biden-Harris world. You know, the thing, it's the Ash conformity experiment effect, in the sense that when people believe that there's no other choice and you have to conform to the insanity around them because that's what they see through the mainstream media, then they will do so, even if everybody around you is secretly believing that they don't want that to happen, that they don't actually want to conform. And that's what being isolated does to people. You know, we all live in these isolated little bubbles thinking that our neighbors know nothing, when in many cases, if you talk to your neighbors, they're at the very least questioning some things. I mean, some people will not be open. Some people are passionate about things, but they don't know any better because their reality comes from a centralized media source. That's the whole point behind this mainstream media mind control machine that we live in these days. So, all right, so let's get to, we'll quickly go over this one about Macron. So for those of you who don't know, the CEO of Telegram was arrested over the weekend, which is pretty crazy. And part of the reason he was arrested was apparently for not suppressing free speech. Telegram, you love it or hate it, is, you know, they're pretty open. You can kind of do whatever you want on Telegram. I can only imagine, you know, because Twitter is crazy. Like, apparently Twitter, you can find all sorts of insane amounts of porn on Twitter. Thankfully, I've never had that subjected to me on my feed, but I've heard some things. And I'm sure when you have a free speech platform, you kind of just got to deal with that. At least we got to deal with it for now. And hopefully we get to a point where we have better solutions for those kind of things. But that's my opinion anyway. So anyway, it appears President Emmanuel Macron is feeling the pressure after French authorities arrested Telegram founder and CEO Pavel Durov over the weekend. The prosecutor's office said his detention may last until August 28th. So, you know, the next couple days here. Several prominent tech entrepreneurs and public figures, for example, Elon Musk, have decried the move as selective prosecution against a known advocate of free speech. In a rare move, Macron weighed in directly on Monday, claiming it has nothing to do with his government, and Durov's arrest and ongoing detention is not politically motivated. Macron said the arrest of Telegram's president on French territory took place as part of an ongoing judicial investigation. It is in no way a political decision. It is up to the judges to decide. Yeah, please give me a break. But this is what some of the charges are, apparently. The judicial investigation was opened against a person unnamed on charges of complicity, webmastering an online platform in order to enable an illegal transaction in an organized group, refusal to communicate at the request of competent authorities information or documents necessary for carrying out and operating interceptions allowed by law, complicity, possessing pornographic images to minors. Oh, hold on a second. Excuse me. So I won't read them all here, but the laundry list goes on. So there you go. I think it's definitely politically motivated. Macron is just another globalist stooge, and he's no doubt trying to executing his marching orders. So this one's pretty scary. But, God willing, I think there's things that have been in place to prevent anything bad from happening. So California colludes with big tech to wield control over local newsrooms and incorporate AI. Remember when the government colluded with big tech to censor news detrimental to the Democrats ahead of the 2020 election? Well, they're at it again, this time openly bragging about their latest collusion. California has announced, don't subject you to that nose, California has announced the first ever partnership with Google and Meta, Facebook's parent company, to fund local newsrooms and launch a government artificial intelligence program. With the price tag of $250 million, $175 million from taxpayer and $55 million from Google, this program will provide direct financial support to newsrooms. The deal emerged as a settlement between big tech and the state government after California Democrats threatened to impose fees on platforms that profit from news content. The multi-million-dollar fund will be managed by UC Berkeley School of Journalism and dispersed to newsrooms over 5 years, with annual approvals required. Critics have warned about the dangers of government and social media giants censoring speech. This is beyond Orwellian, said Dr. Schneider, the vice president of Free Speech Department at the Media Research Center, MRC. With a tiny portion of its annual revenue, Google is going to use every reporter and news outlet to remake society in its own warped image. Yes, because, the media, especially mainstream media, is mind control. That's what it's all about. They tell people who don't know how to critically think, who don't have time to critically think, who are in social situations where you might be working at a job that requires you to conform or things like this, to accept the mainstream media narrative, or at the very least pretend you do, so that you can continue to go along to get along. That's the way this thing works. And you got to hand it to them. It works out brilliantly. Arguably, 70% of the country does not want what is being crammed down their throat. But only 10 to 20% of the country is willing to actually say something or do something and thereby get fired and destroy their ability to work in the mainstream world anymore to make any progress. That's part of the challenge I'm having. I have to go find a decent job out there because, despite all my efforts in business, I need more money to have my family the way I need to have it. And that means I have to play the game. And that means I have to deal with these type of things. So I'm applying for jobs all over the place. That, not to say that I can't do what I'm doing now and have an opinion, but I'm saying I'm feeling what a lot of people have already been feeling. If I worked in a hospital, or if I worked in a newsroom, or if I worked in big tech, and they found out that I have positive opinions about Trump or anything like that, then I'd be screwed. I'd be fired, hands down. I'd be called a racist. I'm half Dominican, but they'd call me half white and, call me a racist, no doubt, or something like that. And then I'd be kicked to the curb. And my heart goes out to people who are in these situations, because there's a lot of people out there. So anyway, that's the basic gist of that story. They are going to, in some capacity, they didn't say how in the article, so I'm not exactly sure what this is going to look like, but I imagine some kind of AI ramped up version of it. So arguably, we've already had artificial intelligence being used to canvass the sentiments of the world through social media, because we've all got a personal surveillance device walking around with all the time, letting everybody and their grandmother who works for the government listen to us and have access to our personal communications. They know when we go to the bathroom. They know when we have sex with our wives. They know our health. They know all sorts of things about us. And they certainly know our political sentiments and things we say behind closed doors. They will censor our free speech on social media platforms. So there's no end to the amount of things that they could potentially do with a well-executed and funded and properly working artificial intelligence platform that has the ability to, God knows what, anticipate trends before they happen, squelch free speech, auto-censor people, prevent Trump's message from getting out there, all sorts of things. Now, you might be wondering, well, what are we going to do to stop this insanity? And I think, at least in part, I think this is something that's very similar to what happened after the 2020 election. I personally do not think Trump just scuttled away and just decided to play golf for 2 years and then think, oh, I guess I'll run again. I think there was a necessary amount of pain that we all had to deal with, as much as we might not like that. I'll be the first one to tell you, I wish we didn't have to go through all that. So it's not like I'm endorsing that necessarily, but there's a strategic benefit to something like this. Now we're living in a world where the vast majority of the population, at least in the United States, is very familiar with tyranny, knows about the manipulation, knows about the craziness of the woke agenda and the globalist agenda, and is highly motivated because they've been personally touched. They've got skin in the game now, which they've always had, but it was a lot easier to not recognize the fact that you had skin in the game previous to the 2020 election. So I think just like that, we're dealing with another situation where the more people feel threatened politically, the more motivated they'll be to actually try to do something to stop it. And I think that is probably going to be something that just doesn't go away after the election. I'd love to say, oh, well, Trump's going to win the election and, he's going to ride in on a white horse and arrest the deep state and send him to Gitmo or, whatever, white hat, save the world scenario that you have a particular affinity for. And that might happen. But what seems to be more in alignment with what is going to happen is that we're going to have some amount of success as a result of the 2020 election, God willing. And then after that, it's going to be a different type of battle. And I think the big agenda for all this is to wake us up. Because if Trump dies next year or something happens, what are we going to do? We're just going to just slowly slide back into tyranny again, like we were before. Hopefully Trump gets an opportunity to clean house. No, we have to do what the founding fathers did and learn how to defend our own houses and our communities and our businesses and, understand what a good trade deal looks like and understand what a good economic policy looks like so that when they try to cram more garbage down our throats, we're like, F you, we're going to do the right thing. You can take your banker bailouts and you can eat them. What we're going to do is we're going to mobilize the good faith and credit of the United States. We're going to print our own currency independent of this. We're going to have a more prosperous nation, and thankfully there's a lot of amazing tools lying in the wings. One of them I've mentioned many times is Ucadia. There's some really amazing stuff that Ucadia is working on right now and has been working on for years. I mean, there's things that Ucadia has built as far as what does a real rule of law system looks like? How do we actually hold governments accountable? What are the rights that citizens should be aware of and learn how to defend? How do we actually create trust with each other? What does an ethical business actually look like? How do you, safeguard your wealth from unfair taxation? All sorts of stuff. And on top of all that stuff that we can practically use right now to defend our estates and our families and on all these wonderful things, there's like a whole history of how the world got to this place that is also reflected in Ucadia. So I'll no doubt have more to say about that as time goes on here. Okay, so let me... yeah, I will be, excuse me. There's some really good introductory material to Ucadia that we're working on right now. I say we, it's mainly the founder, but he's been sharing pieces of it with me to give, insights and critiques and, things like this. And I've been offering that. And one of the challenges with Ucadia is it's so massive. It's such a huge model that and that's part of what makes it so powerful is that, when it comes to rule of law, what legal system is the most powerful? The one that is the most descriptive and the thing that it describes about reality is the thing that makes it the most powerful. So that means in order for Ucadia to compete with the globalist system, it has to be bigger than that in the sense that it has to have greater truth descriptive power than anything that the bogus globalist legal system has to offer, which we have in spades. But that also makes it really difficult. You can't necessarily spend, a couple hours on a Sunday evening reading an article and know everything you need to know about Ucadia. You can get a pretty good head start, for sure. So what we're building now is some introduction materials that'll really show people whoa, when, we launch a new currency that has something called original jurisdiction, which no currency on earth has, by the way. So all of the world's currencies, including Bitcoin, XRP, all these various currencies, they're all sitting on top of the legal structure that the deep state created, hundreds of years ago. So they can use their various mechanisms that they've been building to be like, hey, well, we're just going to turn off your Bitcoin. We're going to, turn off your US dollar. We're going to do all sorts of things. We're going to reboot the economy in the way we want. Now we got CBDCs. So what we did is we created something called original jurisdiction. It's our jurisdiction. Nobody can go in there from the globalists and manipulate it. And legally, they've acknowledged the fact that they don't have any power in our system because it uses the same tools they use to protect their assets, there are things they just can't do. So anyway, we'll have more to share about that hopefully in the next few weeks. You can check my Substack for those updates. So speaking of my Substack, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about this piece that I've been working on. So I've been working on this article I'll just show you a little bit of it. Agenda 47 Explained for the past few weeks now. So mind you, I wanted to get this thing out like a couple weeks ago, but then I got sick, so I had to produce it as fast as I could here. But Agenda 47 is, in my estimation, incredible. It has a lot of power to fix and resolve a lot of the problems in this world. Again, it's not just about, the cabal taking over in post-World War II or coming in the 1860s or, messing with the early colonialists back in the day. It's like these machinations are very old. And if we're going to really deal a death blow to these things and reboot prosperity on this planet, and certainly in the United States, we have to have good policy to do it. This is not something you just hope and pray and, the solution falls from heaven in our lap without effort. That's not the way it works as far as I can tell. So I'm going to just go over a little bit of this. So a couple things. Agenda 47 has seen a couple iterations. There was an Agenda 47 that was on Trump's website for quite some time with videos, and he'd post a video and then have like an article attached to it. And there was something like, I think 45 different videos that were out there for a while there. But he, for whatever reason, decided to replace all that with a more condensed version of it. So if you go to donaldjtrump.com/platform, this is what you see now. This is Agenda 47. And it's kind of like a lot easier to digest versions, which I think makes sense. You might be saying like, well, why did you do that? Why? Well, it's because there's a lot to digest here. And admittedly, I think there's a lot of people, look at what happened with the so-called Agenda 2025 or something like that. Project 2025. People are saying that he's going to put women in prison and, hang. I don't even know what it says. It says, I've hardly heard a few pieces of it. It sounds ridiculous. But basically, my point is that globalist news outlets, cabal news outlets, the controlled mainstream media is putting out false information about Trump's agenda. So if you leak too much of what you want to do out into a world based in mistrust, then the truth, despite that being the case, will not be interpreted by people properly. They will see the false version pushed by the mainstream media controllers, and then those ideas will be the ones that come to prominence in people's minds, and then you lose the first impression, battle, so to speak. So it makes sense for Trump to kind of withdraw this and make it a little easier to digest and a little more succinct so that there is no confusion. So that being said, I'm going to cover both sides of it. I don't think Trump got rid of the earlier version because he has no intention in acting on it. I think it's because there are things in there that he was hinting at for people who know the deeper truth that he wanted to, and this is something Trump does beautifully. Trump he's speaking to the mainstream while he's speaking to the cabal, while he's speaking to foreign adversaries and allies, while he's also speaking to the parts of the truth movement that know way more about the deeper issues than your typical person. So he's got to do all of that all at once. And so I think the earlier iterations of Agenda 47 were speaking to these greater issues, because when you read some of the things that these agenda, like the Freedom Cities component, and that we're going to have, I forget the term, but it's something like craft that can fly from city to city in a fast and efficient way. I mean, he's kind of talking about suppressed technology type stuff. And so I think there's a whole side of this that, for me personally, and Jordan Sather and I have been, when we were on Knowledge Base, we talked about this quite a bit. There's a whole aspect to our suppressed technology, free energy, things like this, that Trump, I believe, knows about and is aware of, that will likely come to prominence. Because if you want to, think about it. The globalists maintain their control in many different ways. One of the ways they do that is through suppressed technology. They keep all the great goodies of technology for themselves, and they let us get whatever's left over. That's why we've had the internal combustion engine for like 100 years, and there's barely been any change. As much as I love, cars and everything like that, the bottom line is that we've had the ability to replace the car with something better for a very long time. And we don't have it for a reason, because they gain an advantage. So if we really want to free humanity, we can't just do it by, closing the border or becoming energy independent. We also need to release these suppressed technologies, because the spirit of, for example, the spirit of the Second Amendment is not for, Republicans to go hunting with, assault rifles. It's because when you're in a living on a planet where mistrust and deception and manipulation are the standards of orders of the day, you need to have the most advanced tools available to defend your house, your community, and your nation from these manipulators. That's what it's about. That's the spirit of that. And then from that, you have the right to keep and bear arms, meaning that we all, as citizens, as truly autonomous, decentralized units, have the right to protect each other from people in our community, so like criminals, these kind of things, if people start to descend down that negative path. Other communities that might try to invade us and manipulate us through economic warfare practices, other states, other nations, things like this. So technology becomes a part of that, because as anybody who's studied warfare over the past 1,000 years knows, advances in technology have a monumental effect on a population's ability to defend or advance its interests militarily. And so we need the same basic thing here. And I think Trump, as part of Agenda 47, the older iteration, acknowledges that and has spoken to it, which we'll get into in this series. So I try to add some historic context to this, and I think this is really important. And I went back and forth. I'm like, should I do this? Should I not? I mean, I've talked about these things before, but I haven't talked about it in this way. And I've spoken to the fact that the globalist machine has been around for a long time, and it's slow, incremental building up. It takes 60, 70 years for some of their agendas to come to fruition, because at the end of that period, nobody who's alive at the time remembers how it used to be in the past. And you sound like a quack retard for even trying to suggest anything like, hey, maybe we should raise our families in overlapping communities where mothers interact with each other to support each other socially. Now you just look like some crazy, cult member when you say stuff like that. But that's how it's been for thousands of years of history. And this slow encroachment effect that the cabal use is very effective. So adding historical context, I think, is really important. If we really want to understand why Trump's agenda is truly going to have the ability to completely overturn a situation in a favorable way, we need to understand that historical context. And then from that historical context, we not only get the advantages of understanding history so that we are not doomed to repeat it, as they say, we also get the ability to understand and play a role in making sure that whoever inherits this great Make America Great Again machine that Trump's legacy will no doubt leave in this world, they don't just twist it and distort it into something else in two generations. Because that's what's going to happen. Do not think for 1 second that if we successfully defeat the deep state, that they're just going to roll over and be like, well, it's been a nice long run, everybody. I guess we're just going to retire now and stop trying. These guys are notorious for receding back into the shadows, just like Sauron did in Lord of the Rings, and waiting 3,000 years, and then trying again and rolling it out after everybody's forgot about everything and everybody thinks everything's hunky-dory. That's what's so beautiful about the Lord of the Rings series, is that peace and prosperity can act as a kind of opiate on the masses to the extent that we can let our guard down. And that's why Thomas Jefferson talks so much about eternal vigilance being the price of liberty. So let me read a little bit of some of this. Having carefully studied our enemies, known today as the globalists or cabal, and their full spectrum of warfare tactics that are anti-life, anti-God, and anti-existence. So Mephistophelian, Mephistopheles from Faust, arguing that all being should be eliminated. This is something that Jordan Peterson talks about, because the suffering of being is so immense that the only reasonable and ethical thing to do is just to kill everything and destroy existence entirely. yeah, that's some of the sentiments that's coming from some of these people. So really crazy stuff here. So anyway, I believe I have identified the many ways the powers that be have engineered our enslavement. As a preamble to the deep dive of Agenda 47, let's take a moment to step back and take stock of the world we have been born into. You know, I'm going to try this method here. Because I want you to see my face, but I don't want it to be like too so big that it's like, that doesn't really work. Okay. All right, I'll just go back to this one. It's fine. I'd rather you see the words. All right, so using Christ and salvation to justify context or conquest. Yes, this is exactly something that the globalists did. This is why, you know, when I say like the church has been infiltrated, this is not like something new, guys. I mean, it has new infiltration that's happened like continually. But the original church, that was infiltrated a really long time ago. And they've been manipulating our faith against us for a very, very long time, and with incredible effect. So this is just one of the little, you know, forays down history that we can use to understand some of this stuff. If you want to know more about this, I strongly suggest you look at the Maxims of Ecclesiastical Law. If you go on Amazon and you search for Maxims of Ecclesiastical Law, or you search for Eucadia, and then look in the book list, you'll find something called Maxims of Ecclesiastical Law. I forget there's a Latin name for it that I can't remember. And man, I only managed to read like 60 pages of it before I got distracted to do something else. But it's like a 600-page volume. And it talks about all sorts of stuff that has been manipulated. Our sense of what is spiritual and true, in my opinion, has been so utterly manipulated. Not to say that things like Christ and, you know, the Golden Rule are wrong. No, that's still valid. But like, you know, this idea of a chosen people, for example. I mean, look how much harm has been inflicted upon our planet because people believe that this idea of a chosen people is a valid concept, and that there's some people that have a higher spiritual status than others, and those higher status people have the right to steal your wealth, kill your children, manipulate and mutilate your bodies, you know, wipe out and do genocide, all sorts of things. We're living in an epoch of that right now. So anyway, the globalist agenda is a series of interwoven plans and schemes worked out over decades and centuries. For instance, one phase of the corrupt legal system began to take root all the way back in 1302 with the papal bull Unum Sanctum, wherein the Pope and his vassals claimed to have authority over all life in the name of saving souls as self-appointed agents of Christ. At the end of Unum Sanctum, it says, "We declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for the salvation of every human creature to be subject to the Roman Pontiff." The term subject in this context refers to being dominated, ruled, and owned by the Roman Pontiff. Consider the significance of this statement. So that's just the first of, there's 3 other papal bulls that basically claim ownership of our souls, ownership of our bodies, and ownership of our minds. And they also assert preemptively or presumptively that we are spiritually aloof, we've fallen, that we can't be trusted, that we're sinful, nasty creatures, and that, but they are the enlightened ones, and they're going to save us, and that's why they have to conquer the whole world and subject everybody in that world to their vision of what needs to be happening. And we are living in the world that these guys dreamed up a long time ago. Now, it's changed a bit for sure, and I don't necessarily think that the grand plan was in their heads way back in 1302, but this is one of the steps along the path to get us to this place that we're living in right now, because the technocratic globalist state does exactly the same thing. It's a secular technocratic globalist state, but it's the same basic concept. In order for the secularists to save the world from climate change, from blah, 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 racism, from, you know, sexism, from misogyny, it is necessary that we subject every human creature to the globalist technocratic state. So whether you can just substitute a few of the words in there, and that basically that last line is applicable in every way you can think of, you know, as history progresses all the way up, leading up to this point. So this is the next section, legal acts for expanding the nanny state. Later, the doctrine of discovery and various corporatized privateer and conquest enterprises emerged, like the Dutch East India Company, as just one example. Later, the British Commonwealth system and early nanny state initiated a new phase with the Sesta KV Act of 1666. And I'm sure it was an accident that they picked that number or that date, where citizens are presumed dead or lost at sea at birth, and a citizen's property can be confiscated and managed by the state as a result, a legacy that continues on to this day in subtle yet clear ways. These older advents gave rise to the modern-day legal system, which imposes presumptions of incompetence on citizens and is weaponized by the elite to deprive them, meaning citizens, of their inalienable rights, or unalienable rights, Over the course of centuries, the modern legal framework for globalism emerged, and with it came the slow encroachments we've seen over the past 100 years. I'm running short on time, so I can't really explain that in depth, but this one is huge. There's so much that branched off from this one. And to their credit, to the propagandist's credit, when you go and search for some of this stuff, they're not going to acknowledge what I'm saying. So don't think you can go on Google and be like, oh, well, how did the Sesta KV Act of 1666 enslave humanity? You're not going to say any of that. They're going to call this like an outdated act that has barely any effect on anything. Mind you, if you've ever had to deal with probate, that's where this comes from. It's the presumption that you're not a valid trustee or a valid general executor of your estate, and as a result, the state has always been, and that's why they can impose double taxation on you through the estate tax, which they've revamped all of this stuff back in the 1830s, something like that, with a whole bunch of other things that happened, which is also described fairly well in Ucadia, by the way. All right, so here we go. Expanding the technocratic plantation via industrial revolutions. We have discussed the industrial revolutions in previous articles, with the first occurring in the late 18th century, the second in the 19th, the third in the 20th, and the fourth currently underway, all meticulously planned to entice every man, woman, and child to the technocratic slave plantation. This was, and still is, the most sophisticated, sweeping, and successful grand con on earth, as I refer to it. It's a Trojan horse of epic proportions, with the outer shell made of real societal and civil improvements that make life better, although not the best, and a hidden inner poison payload of conquest and dependence. Just think about how dependent you've become on modern technology like your cell phone over the past 20 years, and you start to get a little bit of taste of what I'm talking about. Because, I remember growing up back in the day where if you needed to go from one place to another, you actually had to pick up a map book and plot out the course, and you were in command of your own ship that was the car, to a certain extent. You're still on state roads. But now it's like most of the traveling that I do, I flip on the navigation and I tune out, and Google's taking me where it wants to take me. That's the way it works. Or Apple, or Waze, which is Israeli-owned intelligence apparatus software, apparently. This poison is slow working. In some cases, it takes generations of time to do its slow and insidious work. Case in point, the introduction of indoor plumbing and improved sanitation saw a sharp decrease in many communicable diseases like typhoid and cholera, not vaccination campaigns, as the medical industrial complex claims. The price for these boons was to become citizens on the then budding modern technocratic state. That's right. So we've all kind of flocked to these better ways of life. And that's what I mean by Trojan horse, because it is the concept of a Trojan horse entirely. We're going to give you we're going to improve sanitation. We're going to give you running water. We're going to put electricity in your house. We're going to give you access to dishwashers and refrigerators and all these beautiful things that are going to make life easier. But it's going to come at a really nasty price. And that nasty price is that you're ever dependent. And there's also an actual price, meaning a washing machine isn't free. It's not like the government's walking up and handing you a washing machine and be like, hey, we love you so much, we're going to make your life easier by giving you this washing machine. Hell no. What they're doing is they're using, a competitive, supposed capitalistic economy, although that's debatable. But they're using various mechanisms to artificially inflate the prices of all of these services to keep you on the hamster wheel. That's what taxation is really all about. Taxation, money, inflation, it's not really about managing an ever-evolving economy. I mean, at one level, yes, it kind of is. But what it's really about is keeping you on the hamster wheel. That's what it's really all about. So you spend 40 hours of your life, 2 of which are in a car, 3 of which when you get home is to manage your house and to go food shopping and to deal with various things like dental appointments and stuff like that. So if you're lucky, maybe you get an hour to yourself at the end of the day. And before you know it, you spent your entire life working as a cog in a machine to make some globalist rich. And meanwhile, while you're working, trying to make an honest living, he's scheming and wheeling and dealing, going to Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg Group meetings and all these kind of things to keep him in power and his family in power and the whole technocratic scheme ongoing while you're, just trying to earn a living. That is the world we live in today. And all of this is to say that Trump has the solution, in my estimation. Now, this is part of what this whole series is about. So this is just the introduction we're going over right now. So I'm going to take each of these points that is in Trump's plan here. I'm going to flop over to this one so you can see it. I'm going to take each of these points, and then there's a deeper section you can read, like a 16-page document, which goes into a little bit more of it. While I'm also going to go through and go to the older version, and I'm going to pull the cohesive points as much as I can to show, like, when Trump suggests we do something, this is going to have a significant impact in fixing the actual problems. Now, it took us 600 years, 1,000 years, however long to get us to this point. So I highly doubt that, Trump's going to get into an office and he's going to snap his fingers and within 20 days, the whole thing is going to get turned around. Maybe. I don't know. I don't pretend to predict the future. It's possible that that could happen. What I personally think is that it took us a very long time, especially culturally, because culture is a very slow-moving thing, for us to get to the point where we've accepted our own enslavement as much as we have in modern times, which means that this is going to be just the beginning of a very long, careful process that's going to require a turn of vigilance, meaning we all have to hold these people accountable. We cannot do what we did in previous generations, which is kind of tune out and let the machine of government do its thing and just hope that everything's going to work itself out because we trust these people, because they gave us Social Security or Medicare, or they gave us electricity or indoor plumbing or any of these things. We cannot do that. The civilization is a path of the razor's edge phenomenon. If we're not careful, within 10 years, 5 years, 25 years, you could have a whole other cabal, globalist scheme situation happening right underneath our noses. And so I think that part of the agenda, part of the reason it's taking us so long to get to the point where we're actually going to see Agenda 27 or 47 implemented is because part of it is us. We are the ones who are going to be driving this into the future. Trump's not going to be around forever. If we're lucky, we're going to have Trump for another 10 years or maybe 20 years, depending on if we get med beds or something like that. Not saying that that's going to happen, but there's definitely suppressed technology for sure out there. So who knows the medical boons that await us. But my main point is that eventually Trump's not going to be around anymore. And we have to guide this ship. We have to take back our power and never let anybody ever take it again, for ourselves, for our children, and for future generations. So with that, everybody, if you want to read the first installment of the Agenda 47 Explained series, you can go to my Substack, justindeschamps.substack.com. You can also go to vigilant.news, and in the show notes for today, for August 26, 2024, you can find one of the articles in my section. Also, don't forget to support our sponsor, Ascent Nutrition. We'd really appreciate it. You can get some amazing products to help improve your health, ward off the toxic effects of our modern day life, and really give yourself a leg up again when it comes to your health. And also, don't forget to check out the interview we did yesterday with peopleforchrist.org, Pray Billboard Mission. They're doing some really amazing work. The gal that we met at the Reawaken Tour is really a really sweet woman, and she's doing amazing stuff. So with that, everybody, much love, take care, and I'll see you next time on Vigilant News.